My mom said I was unstable, not to a therapist, not to a doctor. She said it to my entire family at Thanksgiving, and then she repeated it in a formal letter she sent to my bank. I remember standing in my kitchen, reading that letter for the third time, my hands shaking. Not because I was upset, because I suddenly understood what was happening. My mother didn't think I was unstable. She needed me to be unstable, and she was willing to burn down 34 years of family history to make it true. I'm Sarah Chen. I'm 34 years old. I work as a senior marketing consultant in Columbus, Ohio, and I've spent the last decade building a career around understanding strategy, contracts, and how to protect what matters. But nothing I learned at work could have prepared me for what my mother was about to do. If you want to know what happened next, and believe me, this didn't end in an argument, keep listening. I need to tell you about my father first. He died 5 years ago. Heart attack. Sudden. One day he was at the breakfast table reading the newspaper, and 3 days later, we were planning a funeral. My father was the steady one in our family. He was an accountant, detail-oriented, quiet. He kept things organized. He kept my mother balanced, I guess. When he died, there was life insurance. There was a house. There was a modest but solid estate. And suddenly, my mother had control over things she'd never had to think about before. My parents had been married for 38 years, and I think, in a lot of ways, my mother never quite got over the fact that he left everything to be divided equally between her and me. My sister Emily lived in California with her family. I was here in Columbus. We saw Dad weekly. I helped with his medications near the end. I knew his financial situation. My mother said something to me. About 6 months after the funeral, we were in her car, driving to the cemetery for Father's birthday. She turned to me and said, "You always were the one he trusted more than me. I'm his wife, and he still trusted you with the numbers." I remember telling her, "Mom, he trusted both of us. He just knew I work with contracts. It wasn't personal," but she never let that comment go. I'd hear versions of it for years. I'm not saying she was plotting anything back then. I don't think people wake up one morning and decide to demolish their child, but I do think that moment planted something, a resentment, a feeling that I had something she should have. For those 5 years between Dad's death and what happened next, my mother and I had a pattern. I'd call every Sunday. I'd visit every other weekend. I helped her with her taxes, her insurance questions, anything technical. I listened to her grievances about friends who'd disappointed her. I watched her slowly become more controlling with Emily, more critical of her spending habits, more convinced that nobody understood her but me. That's the thing nobody tells you about manipulative people. They're very good at making you feel needed. At the same time, they make you feel like you're failing them. By year 4 after Dad died, my mother had started making comments about my romantic life. I was dating someone named Marcus, and she'd say things like, "He'll leave eventually. Everyone does." Or, "You're too independent for a man like that. That's your problem." When Marcus and I broke up, for completely unrelated reasons by the way, she said, "I knew it," like she'd been waiting for proof that something was wrong with me. I'm telling you this because you need to understand the foundation. This wasn't about a single incident. This was about a mother who'd lost her primary source of power and control, and slowly, methodically, came to believe that she needed to tighten her grip on someone. And because I was here, and because I was capable, and because she'd been trained her whole life to see confidence as a threat, I became the target. The inciting incident, the thing that made me realize this wasn't normal family stress anymore, happened on a random Thursday in March. I was at work. I was in a client presentation. My phone buzzed, and I saw a text from my Aunt Linda, my father's sister. The text said, "Sarah, I got a concerning message from your mother. Can you call me after work?" My stomach sank immediately because I'd learned that tone. That was the tone of someone who'd been told something unsettling about me. After the presentation, I drove to my car and called her, and what my aunt told me made me go cold. My mother had called her and said, and I'm paraphrasing what my aunt reported, "I'm worried about Sarah. She's become isolated. She's not thinking clearly anymore. I think she might be having a breakdown. I'm concerned she's going to do something to hurt herself, and I don't know how to help her." My aunt asked specific questions. Is she using drugs? Is she drinking? Has something happened? My mother said, "I don't know, but she's not herself." My aunt, because she loves me and is a good person, wanted to give me a chance to explain. But when I heard those words coming out of my aunt's mouth, I felt something crystallize in me. This wasn't my mother venting in frustration. This was my mother executing a narrative. I asked my aunt exactly what I'd said or done that made my mother think these things, and my aunt couldn't point to anything specific. No incident, no conversation, just a pattern my mother had described. That night, I did something that would define everything that came next. I opened a document on my computer and started writing down what I remembered. Every comment, every phone call, every moment when my mother had pushed a narrative about me being off or not myself. I have a habit of keeping detailed notes at work, project timelines, client preferences, contract revisions, and I decided to apply that same discipline to my own life. I started documenting every conversation with my mother, every email, every text. I wasn't trying to catch her in a lie. I was trying to understand what was happening, but I had the presence of mind to know that if this was what I was suspecting, I was going to need receipts. After that phone call with my aunt, I didn't confront my mother immediately. immediately. That's important because it's what probably saved me. If I'd called her and asked, "Why are you telling people I'm unstable?" she would have cried, denied it, and turned it around on me. I'd be the ungrateful daughter making accusations. I'd be the unstable one. Instead, I waited, I listened, and I started seeing the pattern in real time. The next time we talked, my mother called me. This was a Saturday morning. She said, "Sweetie, I'm worried about you. You don't seem like yourself. Are you sleeping okay? Have you thought about talking to someone? Now this is important." She said it with genuine sounding concern. This wasn't a cold attack. It was tender. It was loving. It was the voice of a mother who was concerned, and that's what made it so dangerous. I told her I was fine. "I'm actually very happy," I said, "but I appreciate you checking in." And I was very deliberate about this, I said, "Has someone said something to you about me?" She paused. Then she said, No, I'm just a mother. You seem tired lately." And I knew right then that she was lying, but she was lying with such practiced ease that I wondered how long this had been going on. Over the next month, the emotional escalation was constant but subtle. Every phone call included a question about my well-being. "Are you eating enough? Are you spending too much time alone? Don't you want to consider therapy?" Each comment was deliverable as caring, but the repetition had a purpose. It was building a record. In her mind, and in the minds of anyone she told, there was now a documented history of my mother trying to help her struggling daughter. Then one day, completely unprompted, she brought up Marcus. She said, "I think you might be having trouble processing the breakup from Marcus more than you realize. That kind of rejection can trigger something in people." I hadn't mentioned Marcus in months, but she was adding to the narrative, building evidence of my supposed emotional instability. I also noticed, and I wrote this down, that my mother started asking me questions about my finances, my apartment, my job. "Are you managing okay? Do you need money? Is work stressing you?" It felt solicitous, but it also felt like she was building a file, creating a picture of someone who couldn't quite manage. But that wasn't even the worst part. By May, my mother had moved into the next phase. She started mobilizing the family. I found out through Emily, my sister, who called me and said, "Mom's been talking to me about you. She's concerned about your mental health." I asked Emily what specifically my mother had said, and Emily, who had never been my closest confidant honestly, repeated back things that made no sense, things that were twisted versions of conversations I'd had with my mother, or things that had been completely invented. For example, my mother had told Emily that I'd been obsessing about my job to an unhealthy degree. The truth? I'd mentioned to my mother that I was working on a big client presentation. That's normal. That's what people do at work. But in my mother's retelling, it became evidence of instability, of obsession. I called my mother and asked her what she'd told Emily, and she said, "I just expressed my concerns. A mother loves her children." And when I pushed back, she said, "I'm trying to help you. Emily needs to understand what's happening." I asked, "What is happening?" And my mother said, "I don't want to label anything, but you've changed. Here's the thing about emotional manipulation. The person doing it is very careful never to make a specific claim. They say things like, 'You've changed,' or 'You're not yourself,' or 'I'm worried.' They never say, 'You have a mental illness,' or 'You should be institutionalized,' because if they did, it would be a clear, actionable statement. Instead, they create a fog, and in that fog, they plant doubt. Then something didn't add up. I went to my monthly Sunday lunch with my mother. We went to the same Italian restaurant we'd been going to for years, and I noticed my mother looking at me differently, like she was observing me, like she was collecting data. At one point, I knocked over my water glass. It was an accident, totally normal, and she said, "You seem disorganized. Are you taking care of yourself?" A knocked over water glass became evidence. A small mistake became proof of her theory. That's when I realized that no matter what I did, she would interpret it through the lens of her narrative. If I was happy, I was in denial. If I was quiet, I was withdrawn. If I was confident, I was manic. I couldn't win. I also learned, because my Aunt Linda is a good person and was uncomfortable with what was happening, that my mother had created a group chat. She'd included Linda, my cousin Marcus, and another family friend. And in this chat, she was sharing updates about my condition, not asking for help, just documenting, sharing observations, building a consensus that something was wrong with me. One of the messages in that chat said, "Sarah called last night and she was very short with me. She wouldn't engage in normal conversation. This is getting worse." The truth? I'd had a long day at work, and I'd been tired. I'd asked if I could call her back the next day. That's it. But in the chat, it became evidence of withdrawal, of deterioration. My aunt felt guilty enough to tell me about the chat, and when she did, something shifted in me. I wasn't trying to understand my mother anymore. I was collecting evidence. In June, I received a letter. It was from a law office. It was addressed to me, but it was about me, and it had been commissioned by someone. I didn't have to read very far to know who. The letter was a request for a competency evaluation. It stated that my mother, as a concerned family member, was requesting that I submit to a psychiatric evaluation to assess my capacity to manage my finances and make autonomous decisions. The letter listed concerns: social withdrawal, emotional instability. Poor judgment. It was all coded language, but the implication was clear. My mother was trying to have me declared incompetent. Now, I need to be clear about something. Competency evaluations aren't inherently bad. If someone genuinely can't manage their affairs, that's important to establish. But this wasn't about my capacity. This was about control, and I could prove it, because my father's will was set up so that after my mother's death, half of the remaining estate comes to me, and my mother, widowed, in her 70s, facing mortality, had become obsessed with that number, not with me, with the money, and if she could have me declared incompetent, she could become my conservator. She could control that half. She could sell the house I'd eventually inherit. She could make decisions about my finances while claiming she was protecting me. That's when I called a lawyer. I called Jennifer Valdez. She's a family law attorney in Columbus who specializes in elder care disputes and financial exploitation. I walked into her office with a folder. In that folder, I had printed emails, screenshots of the group chat my aunt had shared with me, a timeline of dates with notes about what my mother had said and to whom, voicemails my mother had left, and a copy of the letter requesting the competency evaluation. Jennifer read through it silently. Then she looked up at me and said, "This is a textbook case of emotional abuse, combined with attempted financial exploitation through the legal system." She explained that what my mother was doing, making unsubstantiated claims about my mental state, recruiting family members to corroborate a false narrative, and then using the legal system to enforce control, was not only unethical, it could constitute fraud. Jennifer said, "We have options, but we're not going to rush anything. Right now, we're going to document everything, and we're going to wait for her to make a mistake, because people like your mother always make a mistake. They always get overconfident." And we waited. December 24th, Christmas Eve. My mother, like always, insisted on having the family over for dinner. Emily flew in from California. My Aunt Linda came, some cousins, and my mother spent the entire day cooking and preparing, because that was how she showed love, or control. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. That morning I got a text from Jennifer. It said, "Check your email before dinner." I did, and what Jennifer had sent me was a full analysis. She'd obtained copies of my medical records, my employment records, my banking records. Nothing unusual. No signs of instability. No mental health issues. No financial mismanagement. It was official documentation that I was, in every measurable way, entirely capable. My mother had texted me that morning too. "I hope you're doing okay. Remember, if you need support, I'm here for you." I didn't respond. We're sitting at the dinner table. It's beautiful. My mother has set it perfectly. Candles, the good china, the same tablecloth we used every Christmas. And about halfway through dinner, my mother makes her move. She says, "I want to talk about something that's been on my heart. I love Sarah very much, and I'm concerned about her well-being." Everyone stops eating. Emily looks at me. My aunt looks down. My mother continues, "I've asked her to seek professional help, and I think it's time the family acknowledges that we need to work together to support her. I've spoken with a lawyer about potentially becoming her healthcare proxy, because I don't think she's able to make decisions in her own best interest right now." And right in that moment, and I'm not exaggerating, my phone buzzed. It was a call from Jennifer, my lawyer. A call I wasn't expecting, but that suddenly made complete sense. I looked at my phone, saw Jennifer's name, and I stood up from the table. I said, "Excuse me," and I walked into the kitchen to take the call. I answered, and Jennifer said, "I'm sorry to call at this moment, but I wanted you to have this information before anyone else tries to move forward with anything. I've had a communication from your mother's attorney. They're filing a competency petition next week. I want to file a counter motion immediately, but more importantly, I've just sent you documentation that proves your mother is attempting to gain financial control over your assets under false pretenses. It's actionable. We can move forward with a fraud case if you want to." I stood in my mother's kitchen, in front of her good china that was still on the table, and I said, "Okay, let's do it. File everything." I hung up, and I walked back to the dining room. Everyone was staring at me. My mother said, "Who was that?" And I said, "That was my attorney, Jennifer Valdez. She wanted to inform me that you're filing a competency petition next week, which is news to me. But also, she wanted me to know that she's filing a counter motion for fraud and financial exploitation under the state's elder law statutes." My mother's face went white. Not red, not angry, white. Because in that moment, she understood that she'd been caught, and that it was documented, and that there was now a legal record. I said, "I'm going home, and I'm not coming back until you've agreed to speak with an attorney about a settlement. I will not be spoken about at my family's dinner table. I will not be subjected to this narrative. And everything you've done, every call, every email, every lie you've told, is now part of a legal file." And then I left. What happened over the next 3 weeks was textbook legal process, but it felt like vindication. Jennifer subpoenaed my mother's emails. She obtained records of the phone calls my mother had made to various family members. She got the group chat messages, and she compiled everything into a timeline that proved, beyond any doubt, that this wasn't my mother expressing concern. This was a coordinated campaign. One email from my mother to her attorney on November 15th said, "I need to establish legal grounds to protect my daughter from herself. Once I'm established as her healthcare proxy, I'll have access to her financial information, and I can ensure the estate is handled properly." Notice what she said. Not, "I want to help my daughter." She said, "I can ensure the estate is handled properly." She said the quiet part out loud. Another email from my mother to my Aunt Linda said, "I've been planting the seeds for a while now. When enough people believe something, it becomes difficult to refute, even if it's not true." That's a direct quote. Planting the seeds, as if my mental health were a garden she was cultivating. And then there was a voicemail. My mother had left it for my cousin Marcus, and it was time-stamped March 17th, the exact day she'd called my Aunt Linda with concerns. She said, "Marcus, I need your help. I'm going to need the family to back me up on something. Sarah is becoming unstable, and I'm going to need people to confirm that they've noticed it too. Can you help me with this?" She literally asked my cousin to fabricate observations, to lie, on a recorded voicemail. Jennifer presented all of this to my mother's attorney, and suddenly, my mother's attorney was having very different conversations with Jennifer. The competency petition was withdrawn, and my mother's attorney suggested we engage in mediation. That mediation happened on January 8th. I sat in a conference room across from my mother and her attorney. I didn't have to say anything. Jennifer did all the talking. She walked through the timeline. She presented the emails. She played the voicemail. And with each piece of evidence, my mother got smaller. At one point, my mother started crying and said, "I was just trying to protect the family." And Jennifer said very gently, "No, you were trying to gain control. And there is documentation of that intent, which is why we're here." The settlement took 2 hours to negotiate, but the terms were clear. First, my mother would withdraw the competency petition entirely. Second, my mother would sign a document acknowledging that her claims about my mental health were unsubstantiated and made with the intent to manipulate. Third, my inheritance, my half of my father's estate, would be placed in a trust that my mother could not access or influence. Fourth, my mother would pay for the legal fees associated with defending against her petition. And fifth, there would be a restraining order preventing her from discussing my mental health with family members or making any further claims about my stability. My mother signed, because at that point, she had no choice. The twist, the moment where everything really crystallized, came about a week later. My mother called Emily. Apparently, she wanted to explain her side of things. She wanted Emily to understand that she'd been misunderstood, and Emily, who had been uncomfortable with everything her mother had done but had gone along with it, finally pushed back. Emily said, "Mom, I read the emails. I heard the voicemail. There is no side of this that makes what you did okay." And that's when everything my mother had built, that whole narrative about me being unstable, collapsed. Because it wasn't just me saying my mother was wrong. It was the documentation. It was the emails in her own words. It was the voicemail with her own voice. It was the evidence that she couldn't spin or explain away. People will believe a narrative if it's repeated enough, but they will abandon that narrative the second there's documentation that contradicts it. And my mother had handed me that documentation. She'd created it. She'd maintained it. And then she'd given it to her attorney, who'd given it to my attorney, who'd shown it to me. Within 2 months, my mother reached out to me, not to apologize exactly, but to say that she wanted to meet, and we did. We met at the same Italian restaurant where she'd watched me knock over a water glass and interpreted it as evidence of my decline. I said to her, "I don't think we can have the relationship you want, but I can have a cordial relationship with you if you acknowledge what happened and commit to not doing it again." She said, "I was scared. I thought losing your father meant I'd lose you too, and I didn't know how to process that except to try to control it." And I said, "I understand, but what you did wasn't about your fear. It was about my money, and that's something we both need to acknowledge." We didn't solve everything that afternoon, but we established a boundary, and boundaries, real, enforced boundaries, are where healthy relationships can begin. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my apartment in Columbus. I have a job I love. I have friends. I have a relationship with my family that's cordial but boundaried, and I have control over my own finances, my own life, and my own narrative. The restraining order is still in place. My mother is legally prohibited from making claims about my mental health. She's legally prohibited from discussing me with extended family members in a way that damages my reputation. She's legally prohibited from attempting to gain financial control over me. These aren't words I asked her to remember. They're legal documents signed by a judge. My inheritance is safe. It's in a trust. When my mother passes away, and she's in her 70s, so it won't be forever, that money comes to me without any possibility of my mother's medical or financial decisions affecting it. I've also updated my own will to specify very clearly that if my mother dies while the restraining order is in place, that order is to be communicated to my executor and to any medical professionals involved in my mother's care. I'm telling you this not because I'm proud of the legal proceeding. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something. When someone tries to manipulate you, especially a family member, the solution isn't to get louder or to scream louder or to convince them of the truth. The solution is documentation, patience, and clarity about what you're willing to accept. My mother thought that if she told the story often enough, it would become true. But the story wasn't the power. The documentation was. The emails were. The voicemail was. The legal record was. Because facts, when they're written down and preserved, are very hard to refute. If you're in a situation where someone is trying to gaslight you or manipulate you, especially a family member, here's what I learned. First, document everything. Write down dates, save emails, screenshot texts, record phone calls where it's legal to do so. Don't do this secretly or with animosity. Do it the way I would do it at work, methodically, consistently, factually. Second, talk to a professional, not necessarily a therapist, though that's not a bad idea, but a lawyer, someone who understands family law and can tell you what's actionable and what's not. Third, don't try to convince the manipulator. Convince yourself. Make sure you know beyond doubt what's true and what's not, because once you know that, the manipulator loses power. And fourth, set boundaries that are legal and enforceable, not just emotional boundaries, legal ones, because emotional boundaries can be worn down. Legal boundaries can't. My mother tried to have me declared incompetent. She tried to steal my inheritance. She tried to convince my entire family that I was unstable, and she failed. Not because I screamed louder, not because I was right and she was wrong, but because I was patient, documented, and clear about what I would and would not accept. It's a Sunday morning now. I'm sitting at the same breakfast table where my father used to read the newspaper. My mother texted me earlier this week. She said she's made an appointment with a therapist. She said she wants to understand why she felt the need to control me. I didn't respond immediately, but I will, someday. What I've learned from this is that people hurt people, often for reasons that have nothing to do with the person they're hurting. My mother wasn't trying to hurt me because I was a bad daughter. She was trying to control me because she was afraid of loss. And yes, that's understandable. But it's not forgivable until it's acknowledged. And it's not something I have to accept just because I understand it. Here's what I want you to understand if you're watching this because something similar is happening to you. You are not obligated to accept manipulation just because it comes from someone who raised you. You are not obligated to question your own sanity because someone else is questioning it. You are not obligated to prioritize someone else's emotional comfort over your own safety. And you are absolutely, completely, 100% allowed to set a boundary so firm that it requires a legal document. Your mental health is real. Your reality is real. Your right to protect yourself is real. And if someone is trying to convince you that these things aren't real, they're either deeply confused or deliberately manipulating you. Either way, you don't have to fix it. You just have to document it, get help, and move forward. My mother called me unstable. Turns out the only unstable thing was her narrative. And the moment I started documenting it, it fell apart. If you've been through something like this, or something similar, I want to hear from you in the comments. What would you have done differently? How did you handle it? And if you know someone right now who's going through this, please share this video with them, because sometimes people need to hear that there's a way through, that documentation works, that boundaries work, that the truth, when it's preserved and presented clearly, almost always wins. Thank you for listening.